Hello, good afternoon. My name is Brian Dickinson. This is a lesson on the exam technique used for GCSE Sociology, looking at the paper one on the education questions. This will be 20 minutes or so looking at the first set of questions and the sort of things to look out for. And the second lesson that we do a bit later on will be on the 12 markers. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a history and sociology teacher based down in Sussex, and I've been been a teacher for about 26 years, but I've been an examiner for about 20 years. So I know my way around the exam papers. So I'm just going to share my screen with you with a PowerPoint, and then we're going to go look at an actual last year's exam paper. So, bear with me. So, on the ones on education, sorry. You'll be tested on what you've learned about sociology of the family and methods on paper one, education. I should have changed that one. You'll also be expected to know a little bit about the main sociologies you're studied in the education system, okay, or section, I should say. Sorry. I recommend you learn what Marxists, functionists, and feminists have to say on every topic you're studied. And with each method you're studying, you need to know its advantages and disadvantages. That's the same for all parts of papers 1 and 2. And with education, you need to know the different types of schools that exist in the UK. Now, what I mean by that is you need to know the difference between a state school and a private school, the difference between comprehensive and grammar, and what a faith school is. This threw a few people a few years back. You also need to know the difference between a local authority school and an academy and free school. Academies and free schools are slightly different, and it's mainly where the funding goes to, or where it comes from, I should say, and how it's controlled and who's in charge of the school. So a comprehensive was what most students go to in this country. Grammar schools whereby you have to sit an exam to go to it. Usually at what's called 11 plus, and a faith school is whereby most of the education or some aspect of the education will be more to do with a religion. Local authorities is whereby the school is owned and run by the local authority, like West Sussex or Surrey, and an academy is not. They are completely self-standing, and they are responsible for for themselves, really. And whereas local authority schools tend to be based on an area like West Sussex, East Sussex, Surrey, that type of thing, an academy can have lots of different schools all over the country. So from Manchester down to the Cornwall, places like that. And a free school, it's not free as such, it is for the students, but they are completely separate from local authorities. They get their money from the government, but they are privately run virtually, but with government money. And they can make a profit. Free schools can make a profit, other schools can't. Some common mistakes that students make on this section. So they get confused between what a selective school is. A lot of my students a few years ago fell foul. This one has come up in a paper a few years ago. This is a school which selects its students, usually by an exam such as an 11 plus, okay? It's not about you selecting your subjects, but this is a common mistake. So please make sure you know the different types of school that exist and how you get into these types of schools. Another common mistake is that people get confused about what a private school can sometimes be called public or an independent school. These are schools for which you have to pay to attend. Now, sometimes they might be called private, they might be called independent, or some of the older ones like Eton and places like that, Harrow, they are called public schools. I know it sounds weird, it's public. Well, in America, they call public schools normal state schools are funded by the government. But in this country, a public school is private and it's independent from local authorities. They set their own agenda and their own pay, and that's what in education, we call it the independent sector. So therefore, you have to pay to go. Or students do anyway. You also need to know the difference between factors which affect students in school as opposed to factors which affect students out of school. Okay, so there are different factors which affect students, sometimes in, sometimes out of school. And it's worth knowing the difference, that some factors that affect your education are nothing to do with the school. Your gender, for example, your ethnicity, your class background. Schools can't really affect that. But with in-school factors, what schools can affect is the curriculum, setting and streaming, teacher expectation, the subjects that you study, where it's mixed ability, that type of thing. Those are inside school. Okay, so let's have a look at a paper, shall we? Bear with me just for a minute. Oops. Lost it. That's not it. Bear with me a minute, just for a moment. I'm just going to have to find my paper. Ah, there it is. Right. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So the questions on the education paper always start like this, and they normally are the first two questions are always like just a keyword sort of kind of test, really. So you just fill this in like you do with just filling in the box on there. Sociologists use to describe schools that charge fees. As you can see, some people might think, oh, it's private or academy. Was there not to do with local authority? It's private. Okay, and the term is commonly used by sociologists to describe the close relationship between the education system and capitalism. This did throw quite a few people, and last year only about 2/3 of these people got this right, and it's actually correspondence principle. Okay. So in other words, school corresponds to what capitalism's like. So the first question, they're normally quite relatively easy. Describe one in-school factor. That's what I'm saying about in-school as opposed to outside school, that can influence education achievement of working class children. Okay, so it's mostly about working class children. This can be about effects of setting and streaming, whether or not you're in a higher set or lower set. Okay, that might affect more working class kids more, because they might not have the advantage of having a tutor at home. Teacher expectations. Sometimes, if you come from a poor background, some teachers may expect you not to do so well. Labelling. So therefore you get labelled and then you follow on for self-fulfilling prophecy. And the student cultures maybe. You're more likely, not always, but more likely, coming from a working class background or poor background, you're more likely to get involved or to be influenced by an anti-school subculture. They mention any one of them and explain it. Just mention it and then explain it. Okay. Identify and describe one way in which an ethnocentric curriculum might disadvantage certain groups of students. Now, I have to say, a couple of years ago, well, last year when this was on the paper, a significant number of people didn't get this right. They got thrown on this one. Okay. And it's about the curriculum ethnocentric. In other words, it's more centered around a particular ethnicity, which tends to be in this country white. And how this might disadvantage people. Okay, so you might want to talk about the fact that most of the stuff in lessons might be based on one particular culture, mainly British maybe. The content lessons might be biased towards one particular culture. So they might place higher values on Western art, literature, Western art, and Western history maybe, so they might study certain books more and study certain people in history more as a Western. If you don't come from a Western background, how's that going to appeal to you? It doesn't. So people of different cultures and ethnic backgrounds might feel a bit undervalued maybe. They might feel as if they don't really fit in here. It's not talking about their backgrounds. They don't recognise people in books or culture, and you know, so it might disadvantage them because they feel as if it doesn't relate to anything that they experience or have experienced, and that's what that question's about. So please make sure the key words are ethnocentric, you understand. Now, getting on to this one was quite a tricky one, believe it or not. This shows you some data again. Okay. Now, so this percentage of students achieving 5 or more GCSEs in A to C, grade A to C, this is the old-fashioned, the old style of grading, between 1990 and 2014 by gender. Okay, one strength of this research, well, there's a number of strengths you could have. So you could have something along the lines of, it's between different, it's comparing males and females, not just looking at males or females. It's quantifiable. It's lots of, it's data, so you can compare it. Okay, and underperformance. It's quantitative. There's lots of it. It's large scale, and it's readily available as well. So it's easy to get hold of. That's an advantage of it. It's over a long period of time. That's another key thing about it as well. So it wasn't, a lot of people kind of got thrown a little bit on this one because it didn't say a lot. It just kind of was a graph, and it didn't really give you a lot of information. And also, one of the things that you can think about is where this information comes from. Okay, Department for Education. So in other words, these are official figures. You know, let's not underestimate how good official figures are and how accurate they can be and reliable. So therefore, one thing that a lot of people miss, and this is at the bottom, Department for Education, Joint Council for Qualifications, it's called JCQ, are in charge of qualifications in this country. So therefore, it's reliable data. Okay, that's a good thing about it, and it's just this examine. So you know, in other words, what's good about it and why is it good? Identify and explain one out of school factor. This is what I'm going back to earlier on about in school and out of school factors that might account for differences in education. So what the examiners here are looking for are things to do with the feminist movement. Okay, but you know, the fact that the girls now do a lot better at school than they used to, and they do a lot better than boys. So the feminist movement have encouraged girls to study, do well, get careers and things like that. The labour market has changed. So therefore, you know, there's more careers for girls these days. And there's legal reforms, which means, for example, Equal Pay Acts and like that. So it encourages women and girls to go and get a career. There are female role models as well. Okay, these are all outside school. The socialisation of children these days is like different. So we encourage people to do better, encourage girls to do better. Okay, why things and certain education policies have helped ethnic groups and have also not ethnic groups, sorry, beg your pardon, and encouraged girls to study. For example, when I was at school, very few, back in the 70s, very few girls did mechanics or woodwork and things like that, and now they'll be encouraged to do that sort of thing. Boys, in fact, were even called out in the register first before girls. You would call all the boys out first, then the girls, and that would just wouldn't happen today. So education policies like that, and it says it's based on item C. So what you've got to look at is, going back to this, boys and girls, males and females. Okay, why some out of school factors which might account for these differences. What has happened, if we look at these, what has happened that why is it since 1990 girls are outperforming boys? Why is that? So hopefully in your lessons you've studied that. Okay, And please refer back to item C. 18, identify and explain one disadvantage of using non-participant observation. A disadvantage of non-participant, okay, to investigate student behaviour. So hopefully you understand what non-participant actually means, and that they're not taking part, okay. So you might talk about the Hawthorne effect. So even though you're not participating, you're still watching someone, so therefore it might affect them. That's a disadvantage. Therefore they know they're being watched, like when you're in lessons at school and maybe an Ofsted inspector sitting at the back, or another member of staff is sitting at the back, or the head teacher's watching a lesson. Okay, think about that. They're not taking part, but they're sitting there watching. The effect that might have, and why that's not good, because you're going to be, if the head teacher's sitting at the back of the class in your lesson, you're going to probably behave yourself better than if they're not there. The same for an Ofsted inspector, maybe. You might think, so therefore if you were watching that, someone's watching that lesson, they might think, oh, this is a really well behaved lesson, this is very good, and everyone's doing really well. But for a sociologist, that's not brilliant, because you're not behaving properly. So you really got to talk about that type of thing. Hopefully. Also, if it doesn't say whether it's covert or overt, so you could mention, there's nothing wrong with mentioning that if it was covert, therefore you've got to get, if in other words it's covered and children didn't know they were being observed, then you've got to get their consent. So therefore that could be a disadvantage. It doesn't really mention that, but you could have thrown that in as well. Question 19. This is a question with a written source first. Between 1991 and 94, Stephen Ball, Richard Bowe and Sharon Gershwitz conducted a study of 15 schools in 3 neighbouring local education authorities. They visited the schools, attended meetings, examined documents, interviewed a sample of teachers. The study examined how competition between schools influenced school performance. Bowe and Gershwitz found that the publication of league tables led schools to focus on introduction of various measures to improve their ranking in these tables. And that's from the Education Reform and Its Consequences, a book, and it's titled Marketisation of Schools. So it says, so from item D, that's item there, identify and describe one impact of the marketisation of schools, including what you know of Ball, Bowe and Gershwitz. So what this is asking, in fact, is what does marketisation do? What's he saying that marketisation actually does to schools? Okay. Now, what you've got to pick up on is that the league tables, it mentions league tables here, and because of league tables, that the schools concentrated on their position in those tables. So in other words, they wanted to get higher up on those tables. So they might have, and if you've studied these people in your lessons, you will find that what some schools did was introduced streaming and setting in lessons as well to make it appear better for parents. I think, oh, that's a good school. And then therefore they're more than likely make them more successful in league tables. They're going to get better exam results. That might mean they concentrate less on less academic students as well. So you really got to talk about this, the how. Hopefully you've studied these people in your lessons. How the fact that schools have got to compete with one another means to concentrate on where they are in the league tables, want to do better than the other local schools in their area, and try to do things which boost their education results, which doesn't always benefit everybody. Okay. And hopefully you'll realise that the Bowe and Gershwitz were maybe on the left. I don't know whether or not they're actual Marxists, but they're more on the left in political wise in their studies. So hopefully even if you only pick out the fact that they realised that introduction of marketisation of schools meant there was competition. They concentrated on their league tables, concentrated on where how they could improve, and they would introduce policies and do things like that, which makes them more appealing to parents. Question 20, identify and explain one possible disadvantage of mixed ability teaching. Disadvantage. Okay, so hopefully now, depending on the school you go to, really, will depend on whether or not you understand what mixed ability teaching is. Hopefully you do. And hopefully you understand that it's whereby you've got a range of abilities in one lesson, in one classroom. Okay, so you might talk about the difficulties of teaching to a higher range of students. So you might get someone who's on a grade 9 and some people who are going to struggle to get a grade 1 or 2 maybe in the same class. And trying to teach like to that group, it's going to be incredibly difficult. So you might struggle meeting the needs of really bright students as well as struggling to meet the needs of very poor or the academic students. And so you tend to teach mostly towards the middle. Okay, so that's the disadvantages of doing that. If you taught only bright students or only weaker students, then you may not, it's easier to focus your lesson onto those students. So that is it really on that particular one. That's all I'm going to go on to. Don't talk about on that last one, comparison between setting and mixability. It's asking you specifically about mixability. Don't say, oh, it's better if they were setted. Talk about just mixability and how that kind of would affect students. Okay. The next lesson I'm going to do, hopefully you're going to join and have a look at, is on the 12-mark questions. Okay. Hope you've enjoyed that. I'll see you again soon.